Yeah, man. I don't know. I guess the whole thing started with the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Yeah, dude, that's crazy that happened to your grandmother, though.
I know. And she was just trying to hit the tanning salon, you know?
Well, hey, that's what happens when you go to Morocco in the summer. Howdy, all. This is Kyle Whittington, and I am joined here by my good friend Derek Cummins. And as advertised, we're going to settle the schism here once and for all to laymen who hold no office whatsoever in our respective churches, but somehow it's going to happen. So, Derek, thanks for taking some time out of your day to come hang out.
Brother, you know it's a joy. I'm so happy to do it. Love you, man.
Yeah. So
say it back. Say it back.
Love you too.
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So obviously, like, just so for any new listeners, new watchers, for the record, like we have no intention or no expectation to actually solve the schism. But one of the things that I did want to talk about tonight is just some like common misconceptions that you've seen, because you've kind of delved into both East and West, and you've seen some pretty stupid takes on both sides. And I guess I just want to like say that, like, what's give me some brain dead takes that you've seen from the West.
From the West.
Yes, from the West.
Okay. I do think the orthodoxy is too ethnic is a poor take. Because for every Orthodox jurisdiction, there's an equivalent ethnic jurisdiction within Catholicism. And also, I think this is primarily a critique of American Orthodoxy, because if you were to go to Greece, nobody would say, you guys are just too Greek for me. Like, if you lived in Greece, that would not be a problem. If you lived in Russia, that would not be a problem. Right. It would just be like the church, the Orthodox Church. I think that's a bad one. I think the criticisms of you have married priests, that's an abomination.
That's dumb.
Like, well, yeah, now you've just shot a very large, one of the largest sui juris Catholic churches in the foot. That's a bad one. You use leavened bread. And by the way, the inverse of all of these would also be poor takes on our side of the equation too.
Okay. Actually, okay, so you bring up the leavened bread. And that's one of those things that, like, I'm totally happy. Like, there are certain topics that I'm like, I'm fine to be ignorant on, and like the leavened bread, non-leavened bread, I'm happy because that on that topic, I'm happy to just kind of shrug. It's like, well, if the church says it's fine, then it's fine. Because I'm not going to go on like a big deep dive on something like that doesn't particularly interest me. But like, what is the justification there? Like, why is there the difference?
Yeah. I don't understand why using unleavened bread. So maybe you can tell me, but the reasoning, I guess you would call it theological reasoning, and I think it's good for leavened bread, is that it's alive. Leavened bread has yeast in it, which I know some people's gut reaction is like, oh, the yeast of the Pharisees. You don't want that. But leavened bread is risen. It's risen.
Oh, that's cool.
And it has life in it because of the fermentation process. And then we also put it into the chalice, right? So what's that called? Intinction.
Yes.
With wine, which also fermented, is alive. And then we mix that wine with hot water. I don't know if you do that. Because it's now warm. It's alive. A warm body would be alive. And it actualizes oh, come on, Haley. And it actualizes the resurrection, right? So it puts the risen bread back with the blood, back with the water. And so, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I I kind of preface this with saying that I haven't really looked into this all that much. So it's just like whenever I'm hearing all this, it's like, oh, that's really cool. Now,
Yeah.
unleavened bread. Why? My assumption is that sorry if that's going to trigger any Orthodox listeners' assumption, but anyway, sorry.
My dormition is
Yeah, my dormition is that it has to do with the type of bread that was used for the Passover. And Passover, since the Eucharist is the new Passover, that bread was going to be unleavened. So it would have just carried on. However, I think the church has been pretty clear that, like, it's just like, which one? It's like, either is fine. And like you articulated there's some beautiful symbology behind using the leavened bread that I just didn't know. So, yeah. So, okay, let's see here. Oh, we've got some takes here. Unmarried clergy is an issue. Not really going to agree. To which I say, you better let St. Paul know. He was celibate.
Yeah.
I mean, and even in the East, there's still celibate clergy, correct?
Well, there are by choice. It's not an imposed thing. But I think even calling that a huge problem, still the fact remains, like, it's just a discipline in the West, right? Like, this is a changeable thing. Like, this doesn't have to be permanent. So there's flexibility there. Also, yeah, all of our bishops are unmarried, right? So they're all celibates. They're all monastics. So there's some crossover there, I suppose. Sorry, I'm like reading the chat as I do this, and I'm going to turn that off so I don't get distracted.
Okay, I'll throw up the relevant ones. Don't worry.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Oh, well, the Eastern Catholic Church is having a lot of celibate priests. That's actually a little bit problematic because that was an imposition from the Latinization period, when especially in America, where there was a kind of a forced Westernization of the Eastern Catholic churches. Now, I'll try to, everything that I present, I will also try to present the inverse.
Okay.
There is a Western Rite Orthodox like church, right? That calling it a Western Rite church is not the right thing. There's a Western Rite within Orthodoxy, and for every Latinization that the East experienced, there's a lot of Byzantinizations that kind of get pushed on the Western Rite.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, looks like we got Michael Lofton here, so everybody straighten up.
Yeah. So at this point, it's like I should just shut up, and you should just have him come in and talk about it because he's going to know this way better.
No. So okay. You mentioned the Western Rite Orthodoxy. I've heard that before, but like nothing. Like, do you? How much do you know about that? Do you feel like confident enough to speak on that?
I mean, a little bit. I mean, it was primarily developed, to the best of my understanding, in the same way that almost like the Anglican Ordinariate was. It was basically designed to bring whole Anglican churches into communion with the Orthodox churches. So the only two Orthodox jurisdictions, to my knowledge, that actually have a semi-functional Western Rite is the Antiochian and the Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, because that's one of those things that like Haley kind of mentioned. Said that, it's like, does it only exist online? Because I've only ever seen it like online. So yeah.
No, there's a really a thriving parish. I think it's it's either in Texas or Virginia. Those are not remotely close to one another, but it's one of those two states. St. Patrick's is the name of the church, the parish.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that makes sense. I've seen icons of St. Patrick before, so yeah.
And a very interesting thing about it is, like, they pray the rosary, they use Stations of the Cross, they veil their statues with purple cloth during the appropriate times. So they maintain a lot of these Western traditions that, like, at least the rosary, you could say, and even that's questionable, that it developed after the schism, because that's what, like, the 12th,
12th century, yeah. 12th, 13th, I think, yeah. Okay. I think 11th. No, 12th, because Aquinas was 13th. Anyway, sorry, trying to do this, but anyway. Okay, let's see here. Eric is bringing up issues of unleavened bread is sharp and cannot commune infants. I'm not sure how like relevant that is. Yeah, I'm not sure. Like, do you know anything about that? Because I mean, as a parent of children, I think that you know, you would be able to do the unleavened bread as well.
I've never experienced the texture of that particular unleavened bread to know how soft or sharp it is. So I can't speak to that. I mean, I
Yeah.
do know that historically, the practice of, Paedo communion
Mhm.
was, both East and West, and that
Mhm.
was that was a change, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, no, I got that whenever I was up in Steubenville for the debate, I think you were there, right? But whenever
oh
I was
yeah,
up in the yeah, whenever I was there, I was talking to Noah Braden because he goes Byzantine as well. And there was because we were talking like why did this get separated? Because I suppose the normal order for the sacraments is baptism, chrismation, Eucharist.
hmm
So I think part of that, and this is just me like spitballing. So if anybody knows better, like feel free to correct me on the history. One of the reasons why chrismation wouldn't got or confirmation chrismation got separated from baptism at the very beginning is because there was a heavy emphasis on the bishop doing it. So,
hmm
and depending on where you were, like the bishop would have to travel a really long time. So it could be years before you could actually get the bishop to do confirmations, which, I mean, that's got some cool symbology behind it too, because, like St. Ignatius says, do nothing without the bishop. And so it makes sense. And just the natural consequence of that is that you're going to be getting confirmed later in life. And therefore, like your first communion would be later in life. This might be completely wrong. This is just me like putting two and two together.
That's what
So
I've understood as well. Is the bishop
yeah.
is the one that did it. As the church got too large in the East, the bishop kind of delegated that to the parish priest. So
Hmm.
whereas you could look at the West and say, okay, you changed this practice.
Hmm.
Uh, you could look at the East and say, well, you changed who gives the sacraments of initiation.
Mm.
Um, so it's perspective, I guess. Like, which is more
Yeah.
important, right?
Yeah. And then I guess in all of this, like the big question is, and I can get into holy orders later, but the big question is like, do you think that it would be outside the church's authority to change the order? Like, I think I think that would fall perfectly within like, yeah, the church could, this seems like something that there maybe perhaps there's obviously, baptism has to come first, but the other two sacraments of initiation, like, would that not be something that the church would have the authority to, you know, flip flop them like, or whatever? So,
Well, it's not even that the order actually changed. It's just that they were delayed, right? So this is also ignorance here. So like when
no. So my son has been baptized and he's had his first communion. He's yet to be confirmed.
oh,
Yeah.
that's
So
strange to me. Um,
yeah.
but I don't
And
because
I don't even think that's a universal practice amongst the West because I know in a lot of Hispanic communities, their babies will be confirmed like immediately after their baptism too. So I think it's just kind of one of those bishop's discretion. I'm not too knowledgeable on this because, quite frankly, like I've already kind of like revealed how I think about this. Is like this is well within the church's authority. Therefore, like these kind of details don't really concern me, and I'm not gonna really look into them unless I'm given a reason to. Like if somebody that I care about, like is really struggling with it, it's like okay, then I'll look into it. But I'm not gonna look into
yeah,
it from like my own purposes. So
yeah, I don't know what to think about that. I mean, I would think the order seems important, but it's not like I could give you off the top of my head a patristic support for that or like. I think there's scriptural support, but I'm trying to think like they were baptized, the Holy Spirit came upon them. Those two things seem inseparable.
yeah.
Um,
So, um, Uh, I'm getting asked. My son had communion as a 6-year-old, not a baby. So at our church, like 6 years old, like if they can answer the questions, if they can understand, then they could be allowed first communion. And some people say like, yeah, okay, so why babies aren't communed? It's just as I understand it, it's because Aquinas puts a heavy emphasis on understanding. So that way, it I don't know. Like this is, I've kind of said it already. It's just like I don't know. This particular subject is not one that like I'm really willing to die on. It's like I'm not willing to die on this hill because it's just like babies should have communion. It's like okay, yeah. I mean, the church allows that, and it's like or they should wait till they're till the age of reason. And then of course I'm also shrugging and go, yeah, the church also like allows that as well. So I don't know.
It's also interesting though, like, so, in the East, we typically practice like first confession, which would be around the same time that like in the West, somebody would receive their first communion.
Right.
So the understanding bit is difficult because, as I think somebody just commented, like some human beings just don't have the capacity for understanding certain things. That doesn't make them unworthy of receiving it. But yeah, the whole issue of first confession, it's like, okay, there still is this sort of like, I don't want to say age of accountability, but there's this age of reason, or like this ability to recognize your own sins as sins. And so there's enough similarity there that if I were to like hinge the conversation on something, I would compare that. I would compare first confession in the East with first communion in the West.
Yeah. Well, though I would say that like before my son had his first communion, he also did have his first confession. So
yeah.
Yeah. But
interesting.
Yeah, no. So somebody asked about the filioque, and you and I, whenever I was on your channel, we kind of talked about this a little bit. But this is a topic that I've also been kind of just willing to just, okay, I see that there's arguments on both sides, and the arguments go so far above my head that I basically just resign my, intellect to the authority and just say like, hey, both of these seem viable. Which one's the correct one? And the church seems to have said that like, hey, filioque is correct. And that's whenever I go, okay. And I don't have a strong, compelling reason to like fight against it. And also it's just like filioque, true or false. It really has no bearing on my life. Like it's still like, I still have to do the same stuff. So, but I know that you've got a little bit stronger feelings on that. So, yeah.
I think that most, depending on who you ask, I think the bigger problem is not necessarily the filioque itself, but kind of like the putting it in the creed outside of an ecumenical council. I think that seems to be the bigger offense. I've tried to make peace with it and understand it. I spent a not super insignificant amount of time in an Eastern Catholic church, and the Eastern Catholic churches don't recite the filioque in the creed. Though I do notice that the Latin Rite folks love to yell it as loud as they can during the Divine Liturgy, and I don't know why, but whatever you're into. But so typically the East is going to lean into, hey, in the scripture, it's very plain. Christ says, ask and I will send the Holy Spirit who proceeds from the Father. Okay, the words are right there, who proceeds from the Father. But he also says, I will send. So there is some functionality there of like, whether you say proceeds through or from. There's the linguistic issue of, I can't remember which one, Greek or Latin, has two versions of proceed, and the other one only has one. And there's a difference of proceed like along a path versus proceed like from a source. And then I also read like in Revelation, it says, you have the river, the water flowing from the throne and the Lamb. Like symbolically, that's fairly indicative of something that looks a lot like the filioque. And St. Maximus the Confessor, who we're big fans of, seemed pretty chill with it. Again,
Yeah.
can't give you the quote or the writing. I know I've read it, but it seems to be predominantly semantic. It also seems to be predominantly not an issue of the actual thing that we claim it to be, but the fact that it was like put in the creed outside of an ecumenical council.
Yeah, no, I can see that. Though, like, I kind of like to think about the way that the church moves as it's. I don't know if any of y'all are there. Do you play chess?
Poorly.
Okay, so, but like, whenever you're playing chess, every time you move a piece, that has consequences on the game. So sometimes, you move a piece and you get an advantage. Other times it's a trade-off. It's like, well, I stopped protecting this piece and now I'm, doing this. Or if I move this piece, I open myself up to another. I open myself up to an attack, and I feel like that's what happens a lot in the church. Every time you define something that is every time you define something, you're going to make somebody upset. And I think that's why, like, basically every ecumenical council has been followed by some sort of schism. With Vatican I, the old Catholics broke off. Vatican II, the SSPX took off. Chalcedon, we had the Oriental, and just, all these different things. So whenever it comes to, we've got somebody over here very calmly saying, remove it. And it's just like, well, but what consequences is that going to have? I'm a parent. I've got 4 kids, a 5th on the way. If we're going to go do something that 3 out of 4 of the kids want to go do, but one of them saying, stop, 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 stop. Well, that might be valid. But if you just turn around because that one is having a problem, well, now you turned the whole car around and now everybody's got to deal with those consequences. And I don't know if the church can really like back away from that, because it's just like to say we're backing away from the filioque, and like, that would basically to say, hey guys, we were wrong, we taught wrongly, which I think would be absolutely disastrous to the faith of billions, quite frankly.
I think it would be possible for Rome to say, hey, we're going to stop reciting this in the creed, but we're not backing away from the thought of it. And I think that would go a long way towards healing, at least.
Yeah. Well, so it's one of those things of like, if you add Dylan Mulvaney to your cans to try to like attract a new audience, sure, you might have done that, but you just alienated everybody else. So like now at this point, we're talking strategy, not theology. So like, and at this point, like, thankfully, and to my knowledge, you're in this same boat too. I can't speak for you, but nobody's calling me to figure out how we should go about handling this.
Well, that's the weirdest thing about the whole ordeal, Kyle, is like all the people that seem to be the most irritated and angry about this are people who have no capacity for doing anything about it. And also probably, including both of us, probably don't have enough understanding of what it really is.
Oh yeah, I'm there. I would admit that in a heartbeat of like, do you understand the situation? No.
So it's like, basically the more that I study things, it's like my response to everything is like, it's just not that simple. And the way I think I described it to you one day when we were talking, like with a like a fractal, like that whole the Fibonacci sequence or whatever, like the more you zoom in on it, like eventually you're just back at where you started. So it's just like infinitely complex. And that's what it seems to be. But circling way back to the beginning of our conversation, when it's like, yeah, we're not going to heal this schism. Something like this, where we're just sitting and talking in good faith and like understanding and possibly even, dare I say, being heartbroken at the fact that we could go pray with one another, but could not approach the chalice together. I think that's where fixing things starts. Like it's got to be a bottom up sort of deal.
Yeah. Yeah, and like one of the reasons also why I wanted to have you on is because like normally I would never say this to your face, but I do consider you a
Sure.
very good friend. Like, if you were Catholic, you would be on the short list of godparents for my children. So, but
Thanks, man.
like, yeah. So, and it's like, and that wasn't just lip service. I'm dead serious on that. But, that you have so many of these Catholic Orthodox or rad trad versus orthobro discussions that happen online. And it's just like, none of that is real.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I've met several Orthodox people in real life, and none of them are like Jay Dyer. So, like, and I've met many, like, I go to a Latin Mass parish, and like, most of them are not, crazy schismatics. Obviously, I'm in the community, so I know the ones that are insane. But like, it's I don't know. Like, I think it's really just good to see, like, just I don't know, just a couple of guys being dudes. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Which, if I remember correctly, was the name of the first stream that we ever did together,
featuring butt dust. So
featuring butt dust.
yes. So, but yeah,
Something else, well, real quick. Like I just saw Michael. I can do this, right? Because
yeah,
I
go
run
for it.
the
I think you
internet.
got Oh yeah, you got permissions.
So the Pope has the authority to add it without an ecumenical council, and it was added in the West by popular and conciliar work, not just papal. So I didn't know that. I believe him, but and the reason I believe that is because I remember one day sitting in my car listening to the Catholic radio station, because there's no Orthodox radio stations in America, other than Ancient Faith, and it was the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in the West, right? Which would be like problematic for Orthodox, possibly. And it was kind of like outlining the history of how this came to be defined. And I have to admit, like, I was shocked at how conciliar the whole thing was. It was like they developed all these different councils of like, hey, talk to the bishops, see what the
Mm-hmm.
bishops think, like put together these scholars over here are going to research it. You have all of these monastics who are going to pray about it. We're going to poll the laity and see what popular piety already represents. And like finally then the Pope defines and declares it. But it's not like he just made it up and walked out
Yeah,
on that fancy porch and said, yeah, guys, we're going to do this now.
right.
Seems cool. And I was shocked by that,
Yeah.
to be honest.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. And I'll hear this a lot in like my low hanging fruit videos where people will accuse Catholics, like, yes, the assumption, how it was a made up doctrine in like the 1950s or something like that. And I gotta say that, like, if the Catholic Church wanted to say that the Assumption was a 20th century invention, that is the like most ornate psyop that I don't think is like humanly possible, quite frankly, because it was like 2 millennia in the making. And the reason why I say that is because something that you and I should agree on, true or false, there are no first class relics of our Lord. First class
True.
relic in that there's no pieces of his like earthly body left.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay. He was ascended into heaven. And I feel like our Protestant brothers and sisters should be right there with us. It's like, cool, because it's right there in scripture. However, one thing to note is that there also were no first class relics of Mary either.
Right.
So like, and just because it's not dogma, touch that. Just because it's not dogma, for the Orthodox either, the Assumption's not offensive to the Orthodox either. And that's evidenced by the fact that like the local Greek Orthodox church here in St. Louis is Assumption Greek Orthodox Church.
Right.
So yeah, but anyway, like I've gotten pushback on that before, saying like, no, we definitely don't believe that. And I'm like, I don't know. Well, let's go talk to them.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I don't understand why they would say we don't believe that. The Orthodox have said that?
yeah, no, I'm not going to name names, but yeah, I've gotten,
No, that's fine.
yeah. But yeah, which has kind of made me actually want to like call that priest there and just be like, hey, could we talk about this? Because this has got some little bit of confusion. Yeah. So
yeah, because
but,
it's like the Dormition is really the same thing. I think the Dormition just emphasizes the falling asleep of the Mother of God, whereas
yeah.
there is at least, I don't think this is like defined, but there's at least a pious tradition in the West of No, she was assumed before dying. Well, she didn't die after she was assumed, obviously, but
That is a pious little T tradition, yes.
yeah, right.
That is something that you are allowed to believe.
Okay. That's what I
Yeah.
thought.
Yeah, and it's just like you're also allowed to believe in the Dormition and then the Assumption. So like, yeah, it's just like you've got conflicting reports on that. So, but yeah, so
I was wondering if this dude can link us to the Vatican site where it says that.
yeah, I don't know. But
Listen, I'm Orthodox too. Like, just so we're clear, E-money. Like, you and I are in communion with one another, but I'm just asking if you could just show that.
yeah,
That's all.
so, but yeah. So, all right. Well, while that's happening, what are some other things that you've seen, like some pretty brain dead takes, I guess? And if you can't think of one, I think I've got a few that I've said before.
Yeah, no, you hit me with them.
So, I always go on to the how do you identify the church? One, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. And we kind of already touched on my complaint about Catholic, because it's just like, well, it's not Catholic, it's ethnic, and we've already identified that as just like, yeah, that's an American thing. That's not a universal problem. But the one marker. How would you like? What's the response to that? If I said like, this doesn't appear to be one, because, and let me go ahead and like offer my own quick little, like, this is why I don't think it's good reasoning, is because, with valid sacraments, valid whatnot, there's still part of the church. It's just in schism, not apostasy. But anyway, I'd like to hear your response on that.
I think that's it. Like, I tend to, maybe this is just out of like hopeful ignorance. I like to think that the great schism is not as real as it seems. It just depends on how much sacramental rigorism you apply to any given scenario. And there's a really great article that I need to find. Maybe I will try to do that right quick because I have it bookmarked somewhere. I'll do it later while you're talking about something and I'm not paying attention.
Okay, cool.
But the reality is, like, we've always recognized the validity of one another's sacraments, in the reception of converts for the most part.
Right.
So by nature of that, we're more united than we think.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at like the issue just within the Orthodox churches, autocephalous churches in and of themselves, like I can understand that to a degree, but I can think of times where it's like a local metropolitan, right, in the Greek church had his like names day celebration, and it was beautiful, and there was like all these clergy celebrating together from the Serbian parishes, the Antiochian parishes, the OCA parishes, the Greek parishes, and I'm like, this is a display of Catholicity, of kind of like all these different jurisdictions represented. But your point was oneness, not Catholic, right?
Yeah, oneness.
So what am I talking about? Give me something here, because it's like I'm trying to figure out how to answer that. I don't think I don't know. Like, yeah, there's a problem of like patriarchs excommunicating one another and stuff like that. That's a huge problem, right? But like they hold to the same faith. They have the same sacraments.
That's an excellent point. It's the same sacraments, same valid sacraments. I don't. You might know what the EP stands for.
Ecumenical Patriarch. It's Patriarch Bartholomew.
Okay. So actually, what is the role of the ecumenical patriarch? Because as my understanding. Oh, okay. Because I was about to say, it's my understanding that he's just like the head of the Greeks.
That's yeah. It's the same way that like the Pope is the Bishop of Rome, right? He's the Patriarch of the West. So the ecumenical patriarch should have some of the privileges, I suppose, that old Rome used to have when we were in communion with one another.
Right.
But functionally, I don't know really how that plays out. I would think it should have played out in 2016 when we tried to hold a council. That didn't go so well.
Oh, I'm not familiar with that story at all. What? Okay,
Yeah.
so do you mind unpacking that situation a little bit?
Yeah, the best that I know, there was supposed to be this great and holy council in Crete. I don't know that it was going to qualify as ecumenical or not, but there were some issues, some social issues that needed addressed, and the church needed to get firm on teaching on them. So it was planned, and then like slowly, I believe first Moscow backed out and was like, "I'm not going to stand up. I'm not going to show up for this." And then it kind of like sort of happened, but didn't have enough weight to kind of like unilaterally provide any kind of teaching across all of the jurisdictions. And that's, I know very little about it, but that's kind of what I know.
Okay, gotcha. That's interesting though. Yeah. Now,
And it's interesting too that like I think Metropolitan Callistus Ware of blessed memory had said at one point like we couldn't have an ecumenical council without the West. So that's even an Orthodox metropolitan saying this.
Yeah, that's rough. So I know like in our conversations that we've had is that I think it was yesterday that I was mentioning to you that like I know that I'm clueless or that I'm very ignorant in these matters because they're very clear to me. And that like, you know, if Catholicism, Holy Orthodoxy wins, you know, if it's very clear, then you'd actually don't understand the situation all that well. Is that like one beats the other by millimeters, but they're an important few millimeters.
Sure.
And just like how like whenever you really got to get down to it, the differences are like microscopic and you got to get so deep down in there, which is just like, dang, if you were not like a highly intelligent scholar living in the US, like, because I feel like, do you think that these struggles of like between East and West are like a uniquely American thing, or are there other nations that have this identity crisis as well?
I don't know. I don't know what people on the internet are doing in those places. But it does seem to be pretty rampant here. But there's other places like, I mean, I don't know, if you go to places where real persecution happens, right? So if you were to go to Syria, like the Melkite Catholics and the Antiochian Orthodox, they can celebrate Pascha together and they cross commune all the time.
Yeah.
There's just no, or if you go to somewhere like Ukraine, there's no firm line of East or West, right? Like all of these things are kind of like merged together in terms of like popular devotion and stuff like that. If you go to Greece, I think what's that the feast of Our Lady of the Rosary, but it's also known by another name, Lepanto or something.
Oh yeah.
There's Orthodox spots in Greece that have icons of that and commemorate it liturgically.
Interesting, because yeah, Lepanto happened 16th century,
right? Because it happened like, where is that? Somewhere near Greece. I don't know. And a friend of mine who's a Carpatho-Rusin Orthodox, right? But it was in the waters like near that. So a friend of mine's a Carpatho-Rusin Orthodox priest, and he's the one that told me that. And he's like, yeah, I mean, it's just like some of these things are not that clear cut.
Yeah, no, it's also interesting. Like, and I know like this is kind of irrelevant, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. That the Anglicans do stuff like that too. Like whenever I notice that like the Anglicans are celebrating St. Thomas More as a saint, it's like, hey, who killed him? Like, so yeah, it's just kind of one of those interesting things. But I guess it's that's yeah, I don't know, like. But yeah, like went back to the saying like the uniquely American thing, like in the US, like, you know, sometimes whenever I get told to become Orthodox, you know, or become Orthodox, whatever, I'm always thinking like, okay, which one? Like, I don't, you know, my last name's Whittington. I'm of like Scottish and English heritage. Like, so how would I even like go about and like, do I go with Moscow? Like, what do I go here? And like for me, the teachings on like contraception and marriage are not insignificant.
Sure.
And that's where I'm not yeah, so it's just like there seems to be some disagreement, at least on contraception. And it's just like I don't know. And then it's just like you rewind the clock 500 years, and the only way that somebody like me could become Orthodox would be to move to the East. Like, and I don't know if that would be required of somebody. And flip it back around 500 years. If you lived in the East, the only way to become Catholic would be to, well, actually, 14th century, there would have been Eastern Catholic churches, though. I don't know.
1400s, yeah. Well, I mean, there's like what the Maronites are an Eastern Catholic church, and they never broke communion with
Right.
Rome.
Well, and the Malabars, same. They're in
Right.
India, and they never broke communion from Rome.
Are the Malabars Miaphysite, or is that
I have
is that
no
like
idea.
is that the equivalent of the Malankara? I don't know.
Well, I mean, it's the church that Saint Thomas the Apostle founded.
Yeah, the
So
Malankara would say the same thing. But,
yeah, okay, so it's probably the same thing. But yeah, so they're an interesting group too. But anyway, like I know that because like my fourth kid, my second son, his godparents grew up Malabar because they're from Kerala, India. So
but it's
yeah.
interesting. So like perhaps a non sequitur, but like bringing in the idea of like some of the Oriental Orthodox churches, or like the Oriental churches. So like, early on when I kind of discovered Orthodoxy, I fall in love with it. There's some issues and objections that I had coming from like a Pentecostal background, but it didn't take long for me to be like, okay, no, I believe this stuff. But a lot of the like knockdown, drag out arguments that I would find are like, well, look, clearly the West is departed because they used to use leavened bread and they don't anymore, and they used to, commune infants and they don't anymore, and like let's just like one example there, like with the whole bread issue. It's like, okay, but at one point the quote unquote undivided church, which by the way never existed, there's always been some division somewhere at some point in time. Even during that period of time, like the Armenians never used leavened bread, and that wasn't an issue, And some might say, well, people just didn't know about it. So it's like, maybe that was it, but I don't think that was it.
Interesting.
I don't know. So it's like we pick things to try to keep us divided, I feel like, rather than trying to like, there's just not this flexibility here. It's like when you feel threatened, you want to like double down on the way you do everything. And it's like, okay, if West is saying, which I don't think they are, if the West is saying like, okay, Orthodoxy, you got to abandon these things, and Orthodoxy saying like, okay, all the way down to the direction by which you make the sign of the cross, you got to flip that bad boy around. It's like, it's just never gonna happen,
Yeah, the whole like sign of the cross thing, like that to me is also another like, just tell me what the right one to do is, or like which one am I supposed to do? Oh, the Konami code, cool. All right, let's go.
Oh, that was the other point
yeah.
I wanted to make.
Yeah,
as far as I understand, like the Coptic Church, they make the sign of the cross the same way, like left to right,
up, down, left, right. Yeah.
And as far as I know, they've always done it that way. Like that wasn't a problem for at least 451 years. So like, why is it a problem now?
Is there anybody who's like seriously saying that's a problem though?
I do. Okay, so I love Father Thomas Hopko of blessed memory, a brilliant Orthodox mind, a great pastor. Listen to him, you really should. But he did a series of podcasts on like, what would Rome have to do for union to truly take place? And I'm pretty sure he dismantled it all the way down to that. Like, basically, the West would have to become Orthodox. I don't disagree with him on much of anything, but that might be one area where I do. Yeah. And again, who am I to disagree with him? He was a priest. He was a brilliant mind. He was educated on this.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah, I suppose that's, yeah. It's so hard whenever you're not a brilliant mind and you're trying to navigate your way through these things, because it's just like, dang, here I am, just a simple layman, and there's these so many big issues that there's seemingly so much discussion to be had, and quite frankly, like, I'm too busy raising my family, but like, how do I do this? But yeah, so okay, so we got a question for you. So, saw you on Pints before. Wait, have you been on Pints before? No, sorry, just kidding. Appreciate your perspective and story. What are your thoughts on the new 20th century Orthodox theologians like names? I'm
John Romanides and Brian Chananov.
there you go.
I've not read Father John Romanides very much, and by very much I mean at all. I think if I did, it was by accident. I've read Father Brian Chananov's works on imagination in prayer, primarily, and I think he's a brilliant writer and a brilliant thinker. That's actually a very strong point of interest for me, is this idea of the role of imagination in spirituality. Because prior to becoming Orthodox, weirdly enough, as a Pentecostal youth pastor, I had a lot of formation in Ignatian spirituality, I guess, like classically Jesuit spirituality. I did a lay spiritual direction certificate through an institute that was, I guess you could call it ecumenical. The teachers weren't Catholic, which is interesting enough, but they were formed by Jesuits, and which might already freak some people out, but like, hey, they did some good stuff, right? At one point, at least.
Listen, when the Jesuits first started up, they were some pretty strong, powerful.
They were bussin'.
Saints. Yeah.
Can you say that? No, you can't say
bussin',
that.
No, bussin' means delicious, apparently. So I wouldn't exactly describe the Jesuits as delicious.
There's a clip for you.
If I did those.
Right. Well, now you will. So anyway, Father Brian Chananov kind of writes from that very Russian monastic point of view of like, here's how imagination and prayer will lead to delusion. What's the word? There's a specific word for it. Somebody's going to type it here in a minute, but you'll deceive yourself, or you'll be deceived by the devil coming as an angel of light or something like that.
Right.
Specifically in imagination, with like the idea of visions or dreams, or, entering into the scriptures. But the interesting thing about it is, like, I have a book that was just produced very recently by a very popular Orthodox priest in the Greek Archdiocese. And one of the exercises for prayer in it is to read the scriptures and imagine yourself as a character in it and let everything else fade away. So there's a lot of like cognitive dissonance of like, I think that the patristic literature and like the stuff that Brian Chananov is writing about this is true and good. I think it actually provides some guidelines that, if applied in the West, could maybe help rein some things in, which is why I think you need some kind of composite there. So to answer your question, that's what I've read.
Okay, cool. Now, I did see something in the chat that I kind of wanted to bring this up, because I know you're more familiar with this than I am. Okay, cool. Let's see here. Jacob apparently had a question about the Eucharist, and my scroll isn't working for some weird reason. Okay, here we go. Why use leavened bread and not unleavened? Didn't Christ serve unleavened bread since it was Passover when he instituted the Eucharist? Now, I know we kind of touched on this at the beginning of the show, but do you want to rehash this at all?
Just real quick, like, we talk about the new leaven, not the old, and the fact that like leavened bread is risen, it's alive. There's an active life force that's taken place to make that happen, and then it is like in tincture in the cup, in the chalice, with the living wine that is fermented and mixed with hot water, which is a warm live body.
Yep. Okay. Cool. So, and like I mentioned earlier, I'll just go ahead and rehash my point. The church has allowed diversity on this. So, Eastern Catholic churches, they also do this. So it's like, it's a legitimate practice. Like, I really have no complaints or criticisms about it. So, let's see here. The Miaphysite, Monophysite, distinction. I know that like there's been like a recent document put out that was basically saying that that's not really that great of a distinction, but I'd like to hear your take on that.
It is so complex, dude.
Yeah.
The language is so specific and like ethereal to me that it's very hard to grasp. But that being said, I think if I had to like say like where do I land on this thing, like as I've read and spent time in Coptic liturgies and praying Coptic prayers and reading Saint Cyril of Alexandria, I think the Miaphysite expression is most fitting.
Mm.
Because I think it focuses on the unity of Christ. Not that there's not two natures, but the unity of those things. And even in using that word unity, it's loaded, right? Like it comes across as like, oh, well, you're saying that one kind of like consumes the other one, or they're now mingled or they're confused. It's like, no, that's not. Even the language all through that is like unmixed, unmingled, without confusion, all this stuff. Your question is what's the difference?
Or like what's the I don't know, what's your thoughts on the situation?
Yeah,
Because
well,
I don't have enough knowledge to like comment on either direction.
yeah, the documents are clear, like, hey, we're saying we have the same faith, we have a different expression of that faith.
Mm.
So like when I meet with the local Coptic priest and I ask him like, what's your take on this, because there's documents that have been signed, and he was like, yes, I would believe that we have the same faith in terms of Christology as the Eastern Orthodox, as the Roman Catholics, but the Oriental tradition has preserved the expression of it in the most pure form. That's their understanding of it.
Mm.
I get it. I like it. There's a lot to love about the Oriental Orthodox churches and kind of the simplicity there, kind of the primitive nature of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I don't even know where I really would fall on that. Like, but yeah, I think more or less we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Okay. Well, cool. So now you are currently, at a Serbian Orthodox church, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of those cool Serbian traditions that you would have never encountered unless you had been there?
The Slava, hands down. Did I tell you?
What is
Have I
that?
told you about the Slava before?
You probably have, but you definitely have not told the audience.
So like the Slava, I mean, the word just means glory. But so the interesting thing about the Serbian church in particular is like when the Serbs were evangelized, every household would have a household pagan god. Like the pagan Serbs had household gods.
Mm-hmm.
So when they were evangelized, it was kind of like, hey, your instinct is okay, but this is bad. So when we baptize your household, because we baptize the whole household, we now put you under the patronage of a patron saint. And so individuals don't have baptismal names in the Serbian church generally. Families do. And this passes through the father's line generation to generation to generation. So like a lot of Serbs like currently have had the same family Slava for like 100 generations or something crazy.
That's really cool.
And on your patronal feast day, you go to church, you make this special kolač, this special bread, this special kolivo, which is memorial wheat. You commemorate your family, the living, the dead, all the generations. You thank the saint for their intercession and protection of your family all of this time. And then you have a day-long meal in your home where it's open doors and people could come. They come in, they'll venerate the icon of the saint or the angel, archangel, and then they take a piece of the bread, they take a piece, some of the kolivo, they hang out, they have a good time. And it's a very beautiful tradition. And there's a lot of like ritual that goes along with that too. So parishes have a Slava, families have a Slava, organizations will have a Slava. And,
that's really cool. Okay, so yeah. I assume are you like ethnically Serbian at all?
I found out after the fact that I am a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And I've tried to trace so it'd be through my grandmother. And her maiden name is Orgovan, which I told my priest that, and he goes, "Oh, Jorgovan. That means lilac." And I was like, "Oh, so like I might be more Serbian than I think I am." And he goes, I have a friend who has that last name. I'll ask him who his Slava is, and it's probably the same for you. So it would be St. George if that's correct. But we haven't been able to verify this. So I've tried and tried and tried. I would probably have to go to Serbia and visit the monasteries and look at their records in order to find out whether my family does indeed have a Slava. But he said, like, hey, you're a new generation. You're like a reset. Like, why don't you just pick one?
So which one did you pick?
Well, we haven't officially done that.
Oh, okay.
So if we went with the kind of the traditional way of doing it, it would be who my patron saint is, which is Saint Seraphim of Sarov, which equates to tell me you learned about Orthodoxy on the internet without telling me you learned Orthodoxy on the internet. But that's kind of a joke. I love Saint Seraphim.
Gotcha.
Obviously.
Okay. Go ahead.
Or so my wife and I, there's an interesting thing where like Saint Anne has something to do with all three of my children.
Mm-hmm.
So my son was born on the old calendar feast of Saints Joachim and Anna.
Okay.
We had 2 miscarriages, and I read a book, the story of Saint Anne and Saint Joachim praying, and Saint Anne prayed under a laurel tree, and then God gave them the Theotokos. So that was the first saint I ever asked intercession from, was Saint Anne, after having those miscarriages, and we like immediately got pregnant with our daughter, who we named Laurel.
Oh.
And then we found out that we were pregnant with my daughter, on the feast of the conception of the Theotokos in St. Anne's womb.
Nice.
AKA the Immaculate Conception.
Nice.
So there is a connection there that we thought about maybe adopting St. Anne's feast day.
Cool. So we got a question. So I just want to say that I just wanted to specifically point out that Nancy's in the chat. So hi, Nancy.
Nancy's the best.
Can't wait to see you at the whiskey night.
Woo!
Yeah. So, oh, hey, by the way, I probably should have plugged this at the beginning. So Derek and I are going to be hosting a whiskey night at Chesterton Cigars, Steubenville, Ohio, June 1st, 7 p.m., 10 p.m. We're going to have free whiskey, and then cigars will be available for purchase, which is basically just a nicer way to say that the cigars will not be free. Do not expect me to give you one. But we're going to be there. We're going to be able to talk like this, have cool conversations, and it's going to be a great time. Anyway, so let's see here. All right, so James Lewis, who is a pretty cool dude. James, I met him the same night that I smashed my phone. So like you've actually been in the same room with him too. Nice. So he says he is a convert from Protestantism to Catholicism, but Orthodoxy was never considered. But I do know many that go Protestant to Orthodox to Catholic. What is your experience of those who go that route? What are their reasons, and why do you disagree?
So I've only like fairly recently started coming into like that. I was really under the impression for a long time that like nobody was converting to Catholicism. And then I found out that that was not true. And if I did find out, what was happening was people would go Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox. But I've recently started discovering more and more people, and actually more clergy, who were Protestants, converted to Orthodoxy, became clergy, and then converted, if you could call it a conversion at that point, honestly, to Catholicism. And this is tricky because it's not like I would, bold statement, it's not like I would necessarily say like I disagree. I would say it depends on what set of presuppositions from which you're working. Like you change a couple presuppositions in your thought process and you land in a very different place. Like if I were to say, hey, this thing is most important, it seems to be most important, I'm going to go with that. Well, then I might end up Coptic Orthodox. If I switch that one thing, then I might end up Catholic. If I keep it where I am, then I stay where I am. So yeah, I don't know. Their reasons tend to be the papacy, right? Like, hey, I've arrived at this point where it's like, I think Rome's a mess. I think it's a dumpster fire. I hate what I see going on over there. But I really have come to believe that the Petrine ministry has a special privilege. It's a divine institution. I can't argue with that. That almost always tends to be the case. And it typically starts with, oh, wait, the Immaculate Conception is not that big of a deal. Oh, wait, some variety in liturgical expression or variety in sacramental expression is not that big of a deal historically. Oh, wait, this, like, it's kind of like piece by piece, you know, oh, the Filioque is not that big of an issue. Oh, this is that. And then it's like, you know what? okay, and then that's what happens.
Okay. So, you did kind of just touch on the papacy a little bit. So, I guess what is the Orthodox understanding of the Bishop of Rome? Like, what role does he play? And I don't even want to say Bishop of Rome. I mean specifically Pope Francis. Like what relationship does he have with the Orthodox today?
Yeah, well, he has a great relationship with Patriarch Bartholomew, ipso facto of the Greek Church. But generally, I think most Orthodox would have the same problems that most Catholics have with Pope Francis. At least the Catholics that are outspoken about it, you know.
Okay.
So that's generally it. But if you're talking about like the papacy as an idea or as an office, I actually think that like something that Eric says here, like no Orthodox worth their salt denies the primacy of Rome. Like, yeah, I think we say that. I think, okay, here's actually what I think is I don't think the issue is the papacy. I think the issue is development of doctrine. Because it's like, okay, we all agree that the Bishop of Rome is first among equals, whatever you want to say. Michael Lofton, who I don't know if he's still here or not, I remember him saying like, dude, just go back and read the Acts and the minutes from the first 7 councils, aka the ecumenical councils, depending on who you ask. And you'll see this kind of work out with like the Tome of Leo, Chalcedon, and all of these things. And he's right. Like the language is very strong there. And then I find that like some Orthodox response to that, we would say like, yeah, but look at the letters and the communications with like the Patriarch of Alexandria or the Patriarch of Antioch. It's like the same Byzantine flowery language, and it's complex. I mean, it really comes down to like, how do things develop, and do you accept this sort of thing? I didn't do a great job of responding to that, and maybe I did that on purpose, but still.
No, it's fine. That's fine. Well, cool. So that phrase though, first among equals, that's something that I've always kind of struggled with. Like what would that look like? Because it's, you know, whenever the apostles asked Jesus who the greatest among them was, he didn't respond with a, well, you're all equal in my eyes. Like he actually told them how to identify the greatest of them. So like first among equals is like, does that actually mean anything? Does that like, you know, I'm very confused as to like what that actually means. Cause it almost sounds like a paradox or a contradiction.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of is, and that's fine.
Okay. Fair enough.
That's, I mean, we're really comfortable with that sort of thing and the Eastern way of doing things, right? It's like, yeah, you have some privileges. Yeah, you have some rights, but it's like you do, but you don't. That's not a great way to say it. And that's not true. But it's, I mean, the scriptures are kind of with this, right? Like you see, like strengthen your brethren. And like, you know, St. Paul was able to kind of like stand up to Peter's face and like say, hey, you're not living out what you're teaching. And like, you know, conciliarity is a thing. And I think that kind of gets lost after the empire dissolves and you kind of get into the period of ultramontanism of like, hey, the Pope says it and that's it. It's over. Like he could do whatever he wants. And I think this probably solidified the division between East and West at that point. But you see a net positive move in the right direction with kind of like trying to focus more on conciliarity. And something that I know that was really impressive is like, I think there's some like Vatican yearbook or something that comes out. And I think Pope Francis was the first Pope in a very long time who just had his title listed as Bishop of Rome. Like, I don't think like he didn't put Vicar of Christ or any of this stuff in there. And it's like, even I think John Paul II was like, hey, I'd be open to discussing my role for the sake of unity. So, you know, things seem to be trending in a positive direction, I hope.
Yeah. No, I've got a friend of mine who I will keep his name out of my mouth, but he has said, like, this current pontificate has merited quite a few legitimate criticisms. However,
Mhm.
his relationship with the East is not among them. He said, like if Pope Francis is canonized, it will be because of the leaps and bounds of progress that's been made, specifically with Patriarch Bartholomew. He said, like it's actually really encouraging to see that kind of stuff. Have you heard any of that kind of stuff, like in your circles at all, or?
Um, I don't know, because even Patriarch Bartholomew is a point of contention in the Orthodox world, viewed as very liberal by a lot of the more hardline, Russian leaning,
Mm,
which ultimately, you even see with the divisions over Ukraine and issues like that. But
yeah.
um, kind of like riffing off of that, though, um, it is interesting. Something like that often gets a lot of criticism, much like Pope Francis, is like Vatican II, right? And like I think I frequently say like the Eastern churches were the winners of Vatican II,
Hmm.
because it restored the Eastern traditions. And earlier I discussed like the period of Latinizations in the Eastern Catholic churches, where it was like, hey, get rid of your icons and put in statues, have celibate clergy, get rid of your iconostas, use unleavened bread, just look just like us, because you can't look like you're like what you are.
Mm,
Vatican II is like, ditch all that, get back. And now you see churches like St. Elias in Brampton, Ontario, Canada, which is
mm,
by far the most Orthodox church I've ever seen, and it's a Ukrainian Catholic church. Like liturgically, spiritually, linguistically, everything. If they didn't say at one point, for our universal pontiff Francis, the Pope of Rome, I would never know.
hmm.
I would never know. So,
Dang. Do you know any
I
more about the history of that church, or?
yeah. So the priest there, Father Roman Gladza, he's wonderful. I got to visit there, which
Mhm,
he was formed. He grew up in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, which is 10 minutes from my house. And dox myself real quick. And he grew up in this Ukrainian Catholic parish that was very Latinized. I'm pretty sure it still is to some
mhm,
degree. And eventually he went off to visit Jordanville, the Holy Trinity Seminary, ROCOR, Russian Orthodox Church outside of Russia Seminary, and monastery in New York City, in New York, upstate New York, and spent time there, and was like, wait, this is what it's supposed to look like. This is what my tradition is supposed to look like. And he just soaked it all in, man. He learned all of the liturgics. He learned everything, the melodies, just the traditions, the home traditions, all of it. And then they started this parish from scratch. They launched it as a mission. They built it from the ground up, which is why it looks the way it's supposed to look, because they didn't inherit some like half done building that was built in the 50s. And that parish actually burnt down because somebody didn't dispose of the incense and the coal properly. They lost the whole thing, and they rebuilt the whole thing very quickly, identically. And the day that it burnt out, Father Roman went to his icon corner and prayed an akathist of thanksgiving, that God gave it to them for the time that he gave it to them, and that nobody was hurt, and that they were going to start over and do it again. So, I mean, he was formed in an Orthodox context, and he has beautiful stories of being there. Of like, at the end of the service, typically you go up and you receive these antidoron, or blessed bread,
mhm,
um, which is just kind of like cut out from around the lamb that we use for the Eucharist. And him and some other friends who are Ukrainian Catholic were going up to receive this blessed bread, and I guess one of the monks, who's Russian, like tried to ban them from receiving even just the blessed bread. And all the other monks in the monastery, all Russian Orthodox monks, refused to go receive their bread until Father Roman and his friends were allowed to receive their bread. So they were treated very well by this monastery, which has a reputation for being like hard line, orthodoxy or death, sort of deal. So it's very beautiful. And he's a
Yeah.
good man. He's a good man. We stayed up late at his kitchen table eating chocolate covered cashews, and he's 83, I think. And I asked him. I said, why this? Why are you what you are? And he said to me, he goes, if you want to save your soul the easy way, not that it's easy, you should be Orthodox. Everybody should be Orthodox. He goes, but if you want to climb out of the trenches and fight the battle getting shot at by both sides and die a martyr's death, then you should be a Greek Catholic. And I was like, that was really beautiful to me and really
Yeah.
impactful to me,
Yeah. No, like actually you kind of touch on something a little bit, because like you specifically, you have made me like question a lot of things that like I just kind of took for granted. Like it's just like, yeah, everybody should be Catholic, etc. Except like I've considered things like canonization of Eastern saints, such as like this person died out of communion with Rome, and yet they're a canonized saint. There's even one instance where he's a doctor of the church. And I'm sitting over there thinking like, huh. And then also I kind of mentioned like, okay, well, 500 years ago, 500 years ago, if I lived in Serbia, I'd be Serbian Orthodox. And like, quite frankly, that's kind of the end of the matter. Like all the conflicts would have been far and above my head, and would have been like, I wouldn't have even, they say like the Great Schism happened. I'm like, well, guess what happened the day after, or the Sunday after the Great Schism like formally happened? What did the faithful do? They went to their local church and they kept doing what they were doing. And it's just like, huh. And then even like, well, what's the, so what, if that's a schism happening there, then what's the culpability for that person there? Like, obviously it's not like you have to move out of Greece and you have to move to France and, surrender every time things get a little violent. I'm just kidding. Yeah, that was, sorry. I got a kick out of the fact that there's apparently a meme of me now, like holding a white flag that says I'm French now. But yeah, so it's just like, dang, like, so apparently, and I like that priest said, like, if you want to be a saint the easy way, be Orthodox. And it's just like, well, I mean, has the last canonized Orthodox saint, who will be like co-canonized in the West, have they been born yet? And I guess, unless the schism ends tomorrow, I guess my inclination to that is no. And I know I've just been rambling on at this point, haven't really been giving you much, but I don't know. Do you have any thoughts to add on that?
Well, I don't know if this is true. I thought I understood that like St. John Chrysostom died out of communion with Rome.
From what I understand is that while he was alive, there was a confusion between a pope and an anti-pope, and he backed the wrong guy. Okay. But at the same time, it's not like he rejected that. That sure. Was, whatever. It was just, that was one of those things that was figured out ex post facto. And it was just like, I mean, I'm sure that if he was alive at the time, like, actually, this guy was the legit pope, then he was just being like, oh, okay, cool.
The other example is, again, my patron saint, Saint Seraphim of Sarov, is like super beloved in the Eastern Catholic circles for some reason. And he's like a 19th century Russian monastic. So like, yeah, like very recent. And so again, what?
Go on. Okay. That you just answered a question that I had. I've had it for over 10 years and you just answered it. Okay. Keep going though.
Okay. So like when I went to visit St. Elias, Father Roman's parish in Canada, it was interesting. I walk in, it's so dark in there. They don't have electricity in the building, by the way. It's that legitimate. Like at least upstairs in the actual
reject modernity, embrace tradition.
Yeah. It's all candlelight. So it's super dark, and it was like, okay, I could see some icons hanging on the wall, but they're small, and I'm gonna go over and see what this one is. Like I walk over, and it's Saint Seraphim. with a lampada burning right in front of it. And it was like, yeah, it's just so interesting to me, kind of that
Hmm.
culture of like almost disregard the fact that the Eastern Catholics more and more seem to be regaining their identity as we are Orthodox Christians. We're Orthodox in faith and practice, and we're Catholic in communion, which I think is a good thing. I think it is helpful, even though it's unpopular opinion. A lot of Orthodox would say the existence of the Eastern Catholic churches is a stumbling block to unity. But I think as Eastern Catholics can find a way to show that it's possible to be Orthodox, capital O, in that scenario, maybe that'll be helpful.
Interesting. Okay. So are you interested in hearing my why I freaked out?
Yeah, I would love nothing more.
Okay. So the reason why I freaked out there is because whenever I was at Franciscan 2011, and there's a very strong chance that he's here, my history professor was Father Seraphim Bashoner. And Franciscan priest, Father Seraphim, his PhD was in Russian history.
I guarantee that, yeah.
So, okay. So I've been wanting to ask you this, and I have specifically not looked it up because I wanted you to tell me on stream about Saint Seraphim, because I'm not familiar with the story at all.
Yeah. The most famous thing is like this conversation he had with Nicholas Motovilov, who was like a Russian dignitary of some stripe, and they were sitting on logs in the snow having a conversation, and Motovilov was asking like, what is the aim? What is the point of the Christian life? And that's when Saint Seraphim said, to acquire the Holy Spirit of peace. If you acquire a spirit of peace, 1,000 souls around you will be saved. And then he says, look at me, my joy. And Motovilov looks at him, and his face is radiant with the uncreated light of God. So he had a beautiful devotion to the Mother of God. He prayed something almost identical to the Rosary, the prayer rule of the Theotokos, literally the same thing, and said that it goes back to the 8th century, Saint Seraphim said, but we Orthodox have forgotten it. The icon that he kept in his cell was of the Mother of God, basically representing the moment of the Annunciation when she said yes by herself, which is very atypical for Eastern iconography of the Mother of God. Typically, she's always pictured with the child Christ, and in a sense, she is there too. He's just the moment he's been conceived. He knelt on a rock for 1,000 days and nights, praying the Jesus prayer. He had a pet bear named Misha who would run errands for him and bring him bread. So a lot of people call him the Saint Francis of the East because of his relationships with animals and creation. I believe children would say Saint Seraphim only looks like Father Seraphim only looks like an old man. He's really a child just like us. So I don't, I just have a strong affinity for that. Like, he was really comfortable with who he was and did a lot of things that seemed to be kind of atypical for the East. Yeah. What else can I tell you about him?
I don't know. Like that was really cool. That was really cool to hear. Like, I don't know. Like, usually whenever you're talking about a saint, you can either do like a doctoral thesis, doctoral dissertation on them, or you can just be like, this is Saint Nicholas. He punched a heretic.
Yeah.
What else you want? Like
Saint Seraphim was beaten almost to death by a little band of robbers that came through the woods by his hermitage. And instead of fighting back, he just took the beating and then crawled back to the monastery and almost bled out, from what I understand, and then walked with always half bent over for the rest of his life.
Wow. Man, that's crazy. So Eric has a comment here, which is, it's like, I actually think the Orthodox should adopt the Rosary of the Lady Theotokos, which, okay, that's pretty cool. So what are some of the traditions in the West that you think that you would like to see that the East adopt? Or what are better yet, what are some Western traditions that some like an Orthodox, card carrying Russian Orthodox member right now could adopt and it not be offensive to the faith?
Yeah. Well, definitely the prayer rule of the Theotokos, which is just the rosary. Like I said, you can look it up online. Like anybody should just Google it, find a PDF of it. I printed this out and just stapled it together to pray. It takes a lot longer, but it's very comfortable for an Eastern set of ears or lips to pray. So the rosary would be one. Interestingly enough, I've had a recent kind of come around on statuary. Icons are like the hallmark of the East, right? In terms of liturgical art. But if you look at some late 19th century Russian churches, there's actually some like statuary half built into it, which is kind of interesting. So I don't think that should be an issue. I love the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Personally.
Okay.
And I can't entirely tell you like why. A lot of like hardline Orthodox would say like, oh, that's Nestorian because it just separates him into two sons, one human and one divine. I think that's baseless. I don't know. I just think it's beautiful. That's about all I can say about it. And I think Orthodox shouldn't be afraid to read about it or read some of the prayers associated with it. Like just spend time with the material, see what it is. Somebody I saw here, I would love to see an iconographic Stations of the Cross. Legacyicons.com, with whom I have no affiliation.
Hashtag not sponsored.
Hashtag not sponsored. They have that. I would love to see a set of icons of the mysteries of the Rosary. That's what I would love to see. I think that would be really cool.
Oh, yeah, no, I've actually tried like making that in my house, and because we've got a chapel in the house, and I wanted to do like have the depictions of the mysteries of the Rosary for when we're praying in there, but yeah, so
Eucharistic adoration.
Yeah,
I think would be another one.
That's super interesting. So, because I do work with Cross the Tiber, as you well know.
I've heard of it.
Yeah, I think so. But they, I don't know. I bring it up to you a lot. But anyway, we have the people talk about Eucharistic adoration as if it's idolatry, and it just kind of like whenever somebody says that like Eucharistic adoration is idolatry. I guess my only response is just like, if you think it's idolatry, then that means that you don't properly understand the Eucharist. Because It's like, if that's Jesus, it's impossible. Like, go ahead, try to make Jesus into an idol. Like,
yeah, I think the Eastern objection to it typically is rooted in like, hey, that is meant for one thing, which is the nourishment of our souls and bodies, so it's like to consecrate this as the Eucharist and then not consume it, not receive it, is problematic. The other thing interesting, a friend of mine who's a Byzantine Catholic priest, Father Jeff, last name redacted, he has said too, like, he's like, he said, you want to know why I'm okay with all of these Western things and why I'm okay with even some Protestant things? And I said, why? He goes, because like the first prayer we pray in the Divine Liturgy is, O Heavenly King, O Comforter, O Spirit of Truth, who art everywhere present and fillest all things. And if you think that people who claim like Christ, if he's not there somehow, then you're just flat wrong. So it's like, even if you go to adoration and you have some weird thing about it, he's there, right? Start with that. Use that as your on-ramp. And then the other thing is like, don't criticize something that you're not willing to go experience. So you and I had this conversation the other day, and I think it's okay to talk about it.
Yeah, go ahead, bring it all up.
I had said something to someone about, you should go check out this Coptic liturgy. and you're like, hey, I was like kind of uncomfortable of you basically telling a Catholic person to go check out this Coptic liturgy. Like, would that be an act of schism? And I was like, well, no, there is a thing in the canon somewhere of like, don't pray with heretics, but none of us are heretics proper. We're just in schism with one another. So probably the best thing we can do is stop just reading books and like go see what these liturgies are about. Go see what these devotions, how they're practiced. And yeah.
Yeah, no, and it was funny because I want to like tell a little bit more of my side, the side of that story, because it's like, and I brought it up to you because I knew that, like, it's like I'm gonna bring up this concern because this isn't a I want you to stop. It's a I want you to tell me why I'm wrong to feel this way. More of a that was more my intention, because I was just like, I don't think you should recommend Catholics to go check out an thanks, James. It's like, I wouldn't recommend anybody to go to a schismatic group. Like, I wouldn't ever recommend that a Catholic go to like an SSPX chapel, for instance. And then it, it's like, but then how, at the same time, how is that different from me telling an Easterner to come check out a Latin Mass? And like, it's just like, I don't think that's different at all. So yeah, that was very conflicted on that. And then you brought up is just like, well, you can go, you can observe. It's just participating in the sacramental life is where you're going to run into some problems. So I do want to thank Eric real quick for the super sticker. Unfortunately, I can't see which one it is, but hopefully it's in the chat and y'all all can see that. So really appreciate it, man. Now, Eric, you do say that it's not even possible for you to do adoration. Now, if and I'm gonna put so many qualifiers on this. So if like one of these qualifiers fails for you, then like this is like a single point of failure statement. So if you believe that the Eucharist is still a like a legitimate thing in the West, a lot of Catholic churches now. I see that I see a CA on the money thing, so I'm guessing you're in Canada. There are a lot of Catholic churches that actually do have perpetual adoration, to where like you don't even have to go into the chapel or to the church proper. You can go to like a side chapel. You can go in there. You can do a holy hour. It's like open. You may need to call the priest and get like a code to get into the door or whatever. But you could go and you can go in that and actually adore our Lord in the Eucharist there, if you believe that Eucharist is still valid and is still present. And then I would also recommend, go ahead.
I actually I have one slight rebuttal to it's not possible for us to do adoration. If you go to a pre-sanctified divine liturgy during Great Lent, you do Eucharistic adoration every time. Because so typically during the Great Entrance, the elements, the gifts that are going to be prepared and consecrated are processed outside of one of the deacon's doors and into the royal doors and put on the altar before like the epiclesis happens. During the weekdays during Great Lent, you don't consecrate a Eucharist. I don't even know if that's the right terminology to use, but so it's pre-sanctified. There's like an extra one made on Sunday that then remains there until the pre-sanctified divine liturgy. And then when that is processed out of the deacon's door and around to the royal doors, all of the faithful bow down and put their foreheads on the floor. So if that's not Eucharistic adoration, I don't know what is.
Well, yeah, and it's just like adoration is actually like in English, it's the better word for worship. So like, because worship's actually, if you go down to the etymology and whatnot, and I do this because I hang out in like low-hanging fruit Protestant circles a lot, but the word worship is actually insufficient to communicate what we owe to God. But yeah, so anyway, but that's my recommendation. I would not recommend being deceptive to your priests. So like if you would like to go to a Catholic adoration chapel, clear it with your priest. If your priest is cool with it, I'd say that you're probably fine. But I mean, at the same time, I'm not going to recommend that literally anybody run against the rules that like their canonical churches established for them. So, but yeah. But anyway, so
Very, very, very Eastern of you to say, ask your priest.
yeah, well, I mean, you know, but yeah, it you know, like that's one thing that I've noticed, because I think I've mentioned this before, but whenever I was converting from Protestantism, I did not have a single encounter with the East. My only encounter with Orthodoxy was through the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which is
Not far off.
yeah. So it's just like, okay, whatever. You know, I've actually been to Greece. I've been to Athens, and which was kind of crazy because if you're familiar with the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, the only phrase that I knew how to say in Greek, I did not know how to say please. I did not know how to say thank you. However, I did know how to say I have 3 testicles, and you know that's not particularly useful for starting conversation. Maybe ending it.
I think it gets some good conversation going for sure. But.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if somebody came up to me and announced that in English, it'd be like, I have no idea what you're saying. Anyway, so, oh, actually, okay. So while I'm on my rambling, actually, Eric has a great question because I don't know what spiritual father means. So why don't Catholics have spiritual fathers like we do? So I guess, Derek, what is a spiritual father?
Yeah, so I mean, it could be your parish priest. Often it can be a monastic. It functions similarly to a spiritual director, but it's a lot more intimate and focused on the idea of obedience. So your spiritual father gives you a prayer rule. Here's your confessions. Gives you advice on what to do about certain things. So it's very spiritual direction in nature. But it's interesting. Like I was going to mention something about this when you said like ask your priest, and I said, well, that was very Eastern of you. And it was, a lot of times it's like, well, check the catechism. It's focused on like what's the highest level say about this sort of thing in the West,
right?
Whereas the East tends to be kind of like hyper localized, which has its benefits, and I think is an important thing, and is something that the West could really benefit from. So like, I know like in my community, which I'm sure we'll talk about, like I've told people like, hey, before we do this, like talk to your spiritual director, talk to your spiritual father. If you don't have one, get one. Like,
yeah.
So yeah, it's not that the West doesn't. They have spiritual directors, and spiritual directors function very similar to a spiritual father. Like for all intents and purposes, my spiritual father is a Benedictine Roman Catholic monk, has been for like 7 years. And that's not going to change because I'm Orthodox now. He was my spiritual father when I was a Protestant. And it's just...
that's still like the craziest thing that I've ever heard, like in the best kind of way. But
yeah. He wrote a paper. I'll have to find it and share it with you at least. But he wrote about spiritual direction from an Eastern perspective of like, here's the emphasis with a spiritual father and obedience and an elder. So you hear a lot of this, like the holy elders of Mount Athos and things like that. So
yeah, so it's really interesting. So as you were describing like spiritual directors, spiritual fathers, like there's the emphasis on obedience. So I think in the West, like, okay, well, straight up, like most of us do not have spiritual directors, period. Confession time. I've only ever been to one spiritual direction appointment, and I have since like procrastinated making the second one. Now, that being said, what you described was kind of my understanding, but I really do think that that's more because of my military background. So obviously, if you're in the military, there's a heavy emphasis on obedience, and the role of like the big rules, and like that. Honestly, like the way that the Catholic Church deals with things and the way that the U.S. military deals with things is almost identical. So you have like the high level instruction that is very, very, very loose. And it's basically what you're getting from Rome isn't the bar, it's the floor. So it's just like, this is the minimum that you have to do. and then that leaves the priest, that your spiritual father, your spiritual director, that gives him the ability of like, cool, so this is the minimum. Now I'm going to help you get the rest of the way to, what's the Stairway to Heaven, or the Ladder to Heaven? What's that? What's that book?
The Ladder of Divine Ascent.
Yeah, the Ladder of Divine Ascent. So it's just like, I'm going to help you go the rest of this way. So I suppose it's yeah. So, but anyway.
And the interesting thing with this, what Lucy said, who's a good friend, the Western tradition of spiritual direction tends to be more open-handed, of like, I'm holding this sacred space to listen to you discern, but ultimately you're in the driver's seat. Well, really, ultimately the Holy Spirit is in the driver's seat, right? Which, again, it's not like the East in the spiritual fatherhood aspect would say, oh yeah, the Holy Spirit's not in charge, the spiritual father is. But I think just kind of the classical Western understanding of spiritual direction is a little more open, in a sense. But something that you just said too, having the minimum, again, that same Byzantine priest, Father Jeff, last name redacted, he wouldn't care. I just feel like I shouldn't say it. He said the nice thing about being an Eastern Catholic in that regard is, he said, my parishioners during Lent, I can say, here's the canonical minimum. Our tradition says, here's the gold standard of monasticism. Now we have some guidelines within which to work, and let's figure out where you fall on that. Rather than saying, you just got to keep going for this. You got to keep going for this, and falling short and possibly despairing over it.
Right.
Which shouldn't happen, right? You have a good spiritual father, you have a good parish priest. That's not going to happen. But, we see what happens in these overly rigorous circles.
Yeah, it was whenever I was in your was it you, or is it Cactoid Jim that was telling me about Brad Trads?
I think it might have been me.
Yeah. So
I don't even know if that's a real thing, but I like it.
Oh, okay. Well, if it's not a real thing, you've already named them before they became a real thing. So yeah.
Brad Trads, for the people at home, are Byzantine Catholics who are like rad trads for the Eastern tradition only. Basically, like, you shouldn't be anything other than Eastern Catholic.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Yeah, so Nick's Highlander brought up in the live chat a name of somebody when you said like, oh, these hardline, yeah. So it's just like, yep. I'm not gonna name his name on the stream, but it's in the live chat. But yeah. So, well, dang, we've been going for like an hour and 15. Is there a topic that maybe like we haven't touched on yet that you'd like to bring up?
Honestly, I don't think so, man. Like, I think this was good in that it was organic, and it's like, yeah, some people might be disappointed that we didn't like tackle X, Y, and Z, but I think this is exactly the way to do it, which is like, just start talking to each other, share ideas back and forth. I actually don't think we disagreed very much, if at all, on anything.
I would. So okay. So honestly, any like product, like, I think, yeah, you're actually the first Orthodox to appear on the show, and that's honestly probably mostly because I don't know very many. But like, typically, whenever there is going to be somebody in here, I'm never going to argue with them, at least not on the first like encounter. That being said, like, I think you actually hit the nail on the head. Is like, I don't think we really agreed, and that's A, B, or C. Sorry, Mel. But
next time.
Yeah, let's see here. I'm trying to see. I found a C. I'm looking for a B. But anyway, you want to bring something up while I look for a B?
No.
Here we go. I'm touching A.
Excellent job.
I'm touching B. And I'm
showing off his books.
And I'm touching C. So okay, there you go, Mel. Now you can rest easy. So, keep it going, Chris.
Yeah,
To keep it going, got to break Seamus Coughlin's runtime. That was an insane stream.
not gonna
So,
happen.
yeah. Okay. Well, y'all, this was a great time. Derek, this was a great conversation. Hope to have you back soon. I
man.
mean, you and I'll be Marco Poloing, I'm sure. Which, by the way, like, I'm gonna just go ahead and drop a plug for Derek's Locals, and I'll hopefully I can remember to add it into the description on this video. Derek's Locals is actually a really cool community. Got a lot of really cool people in there. So, you know, get in there. Yeah, you know, it's going to cost you like $5 a month, but I mean, that's the price of like a freaking coffee, guys. Come on now. Derek's a cool guy. And yeah, I don't know. It's a really cool community. And, you know, his live streams are a lot of fun. Dare I say they're actually more fun than Matt Frad's. So, yeah, I don't know. Like it's a really small community and it's a lot of really cool stuff.
I'm trying to keep it that way. Like I won't say I'm trying to keep it that way, but I'm not focused on like growing it. So a dose of theosis.locals.com. We're currently doing Tuesday chill chats. Fridays we're studying and reading through the Way of the Pilgrim, which is very fun. A great just spiritual read. Today we talked about actually Father Boniface Hicks' book, Through the Heart of St. Joseph. It's mostly a Catholic audience, but it is emphasizing this sort of thing. How can East and West come together and just have good conversations and teach each other about our traditions and like why we hold to these sort of things?
Yeah.
Yeah. And next week I'm interviewing an Ethiopian Orthodox deacon. So I'm very excited about that.
Are you using the thumbnail that I designed for you, or did you change it up a bit?
No, I'm using it.
That's great. Yeah. So yeah, but anyway, like, I think like these kind of conversations are far more fruitful because, you know, it's just there's so much anger on the internet. There's so many people. Like, there's no shortage of fights that are happening, and like y'all, like, just go talk to a person, like, for real. Like, have that heart of like curiosity. Is like, hey, I want to understand you as best as I possibly can before I offer a single criticism, because it's so easy to like want to jump ahead and get to the point where like you can argue. And I'm feeling like, Derek, you and I are just now like good enough friends to where like we can have like some like serious disagreements. And it's been months of you since like you messaged me like it or not, Kyle, we're friends now. So
Yep. It's over.
So, yeah, no, and nah. So like y'all like have these conversations with charity. Hopefully we gave a good example here. But you know, Derek, I'll let you have the last word, and then I'll go ahead and close this out.